All right, so we are on our last thing of evolution. Then we're going to do a set of notes on classification. We'll be done with this part. So we're just basically going to finish up with fossils that we talked about in the last one, but understand biochemistry and embryology. So just evidence. So how do we know evolution actually occurred? Well, fossils. If we saw bones, we know something lived here once. Anatomy, by the body structures. Embryology, how things develop. Biochemistry. So again, bio is life and obviously chemistry. So the chemistry of life, which is what? DNA. All evidence shows that it was a common ancestry. So if we can get all this there, it's a common ancestry. So let's look at these skulls. Let's just look at the skulls because these are fossils. Of course, it provides a record that something happened. But just look. Over time, look how the skulls have changed. You know? Of course, look at when back in the day, the heads back here had more like a hook. We had back in the day they didn't have instruments to help get the baby out. So when the babies came out, the mother, they came out how she pushed them out. Well, the older we got, and especially with advancing technology, we know how to kind of shape the heads a little bit. We know how to do that when the baby come out, and that wasn't pretty much normal back in the day. So now we have to look at the anatomy. This anatomy is the structural adaptations. You have to understand these terms. These are very important. So the first one is homologous. So homologous means what? Same, right? So this is that the similarities and arrangements. So develop the same, so they look alike, but they do different functions. Like look at our arm. It's the same bones. We have the humerus, we have the ulna, and we have the radius. Okay? And then we have the metacarpals and the carpals. You look at a bat. He has the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. And he has these bones here again, the carpals, and then we have the phalanges, which is the metacarpals. It's the same bones. But do our arms do what a bat arms do? No. Do we do the same thing as a wheel? No. So we just have the same structure. So everything looks alike but different functions. So now we have analogous. Analogous structures is mean they're similar in function, but they look different. So look different. So look at every wing. Every wing looks different, but every wing does the same thing. It flies. We also have to know about vesicle structures. Vesicle structures is stuff that we don't need anymore, like the tonsils, the appendants. Like snakes used to have legs. If you pull up their skeleton, they actually have little pieces where legs would be. So if you look here, we have to know the difference between homology and analogy. Now, embryology. So embryo, key term, embryo. So similarities in the early stages of growth and development. So if you look here, this is a fish, salamander. This is a human, and let's just look at us. This is a hog right here. We all look the same when we kind of start off, but we all grow differently after a while. So we all have a similarity. It's definitely hard to distinguish embryos because by how we look, we all look the same. Now, biochemistry. This is again comparison of DNA and amino acid sequences. So obviously we can tell that these are related, right? We can tell that there's a little bit of difference if you look at them. But if you look at the DNA, you'll notice that the color lines pretty much mark. There's a few differences just right here at the beginning, but we know that they're pretty much related. But here we have owls, and we was like, well, these owls, an owl is an owl, but if you look at the DNA, their DNA doesn't even really line up at all. So just because it's in a category like a cat and a cheetah, they're both cats, but they're not the same type of cat. Look at the last name. That's our next lesson in classification. So just to review, what type of selection is provided by nature and the human selected traits is useful? Artificial, right? Because we are giving that, but we get to choose. What type of selection favors one? Directional. So if we're going one direction, that's where we're headed. Term used to describe when the species blends with the environment, camouflage. All right, part 4. So here we're going to learn how natural selection can lead a species to evolve and change over time, explain how species evolve, describe the patterns of evolution, explain rates of equilibrium. So, all right, mechanism of evolution, population. So we should remember that populations is at least a group of people, a species who can interbreed in that same area. Evolution occurs in populations, not a single individual, okay? But it changes over time. So populations change over time. Like a horse back in the day used to be really little. He actually had like 4 feet, well, 4 toes. Now look at the horses now. So this is a allele frequency that will change in individuals that actually changes into evolution. So we have to know gene pool. You have to know these words. That's why I put a star. So gene pool, all the genes inside of a population. This is why this is kind of like a pool and there's the hogs around it. All the genes are inside that population. Allele frequency is a percentage of a specific allele in that gene pool. This is going to be the Hardy-Weinberg principle, which is basically the allele frequencies remain constant, but the population is in genetic equilibrium. So this will be more off of here. So we have some gray owls and we have some brown owls. So we have different alleles, but the genetics is still the same. So genetic equilibrium. Here's one of the things. Population genes remain the same and not evolving. So again, you might have had a green beetle and then a brown beetle, but they had, mixed kids. 2 brown beetles can possibly have a green baby because it has the alleles. So to stay in equilibrium, you must have what? Random mating within the population, okay, to keep this equilibrium there. Large population. No movement in and out. So once you win, you win. And no mutations. We can't be having no corruptness. We need to keep it, clean. And no natural selection. So what does that mean? It has to be what? Pick and choose, which is artificial. So natural selection, of course, is the survival of the fittest, which means, again, whoever is fit to survive. You look at this picture. This ground is supposed to be like, I guess, an orange, just like clay. And then the birds came. They ate the green beetles because the green beetles can stick out. And the orange beetles, obviously, they're not camouflaged in. I mean, they're camouflaged in, so they are going to be the ones who survive, and all the new beetles that come are going to be orange. Changes in equilibrium will be mutations, and that's a change in DNA. This can be spontaneous and random, as we talked about before. This can be by environment as well, by chemicals, bacteria, and viruses. Sometimes mutations can be fatal, right? If you get cancer, that's a mutation inside of a thing. It can be fatal. These things can change also in the phenotype and influence natural selection. So these things, again, can happen back inside of what we see, which does influence natural selection. So if something is fatal or if it's not fatal, maybe they changed the color and it was more beneficial. So a mutation. We have antibiotic resistant in bacteria, pesticide resistant in insects. So basically here, if you see that it can eventually, the bugs are eating the leaf, put the pesticide on it, and they begin to live and fight off the pesticide because they mutated. So they began to get that gene. So I'm like, you ain't better kill me off. I'm gonna learn how to survive through this. So antiviral resistance. So now you have to know genetic drift. So genetic drift is basically a chance of events in small isolated populations. So look at here. We have small populations. He was walking, all of a sudden he stepped on the green bugs. Obviously, the green beetles ain't gonna live in the middle section, right? So that's a genetic drift. Boundary effect, changes in allele frequencies is the migration of a subgroup of a population. Gene flow right here is what I just circled. The brown was like, he was tired of dealing with the brown folks. He wanted to deal with the green folks. He wanted to have some green babies. So he left over there, and now his gene's over here. So his gene is flowing in and out of populations. How do species evolve? So species look alike. Then species are look alike as well as they can produce further offspring. So if you have the same species, there's only one human species. So that's how we're able to have children. You cannot be one of the people trying to have children with animals and stuff. That's not going to happen. We have speciation, which is the evolution of a new species that occurs when the similar population no longer interbreeds to produce fertile offspring. No longer interbreeds to produce fertile offspring. Causes of speciation, we have geographic isolation, which is called allopatry, when two populations are separated because of geographic barriers. So geographic isolations. So here's the population, a river is here, so now they're separated. But as they separated, you see that this one had like a greenish tint. Well, now they started making greener beetles, and this one stayed in the brown, and then the green eventually took over. And then if they come back together, they'll have a mixed generation again. So again, river, mountains, again, I cannot have a baby with somebody in Africa right now. I'm here in Hope County. They're over there in Zimbabwe. I can't have a baby right now. That's not going to work. You have to be right there with the person, right? So that's the same thing with this. They cannot continue to push until they are with that person. So behavior isolation. So sometimes behaviors take a place in this. Two different type of populations are capable of interbreeding, but they have different rituals. Like a lot of times when you hear the crickets cricking at night, they're just giving you a signal that they're trying to get busy. Okay, frogs, all of those things, and people could understand those are mating calls, but a lot of them again have different behavior. This one right here, you have temporal reproductive isolation. So this is temporal, when species produce at different times. Like, yes, these are both frogs, but this frog is a wood frog who can only have babies in March, and this one can only have babies in April. So they can have all they want to, but they will never be able to have kids together. Populations of evolution. So we have divergent. So divergent, divide. So this is when a species once were similar but become different. So they used to look alike, and then all of a sudden they separated. Adaptive radiation is basically rapid divergent evolution that occurs when a species evolves into a species to fit diverse habitats, which is pretty much here. They all stayed at the Galapagos Islands, but the birds had to quickly adjust to the place that they stayed at on the islands. So again, those are the finches that Darwin looked at. So we also have convergent. So convergent means collide. So this is when they didn't look alike, but now they're starting to look alike. So now the dorsal fin and the flippers and stuff are kind of changing a little bit and resembling each other for like the shark and dolphin. But movement through air and water or eating similar foods, those things you can actually start resembling. So another patterns of evolution is co-evolutionist. That means that when one changes, like right here, this flower was small. Hey, guess what? The flower got big. And then guess what got big too? The bug. So explanations of the rate of evolution, though, there's two. We can either do gradually, which is slow, or we're going to be punctuated, which is immediately. So it can take a long time or it can be immediate. So just to review, what are the 5 things that must happen for a population not to change? Random mating, large population, no movement, no mutations, no selection. What does the phrase survival of the fittest describes? Natural selection. Term for changing slowly and steady? Gradualism. That's it for evolution.